There was a time when getting a tattoo meant sitting across from a man who had learned his trade by watching someone else do it, in a shop that had no inspection certificate on the wall, using tools that no regulatory body had ever reviewed. The equipment that early tattoo artists worked with was improvised, inherited, and in many cases genuinely dangerous. It solved the immediate problem. It put ink under the skin. What it did to the skin in the process, what it introduced into the blood, what it left behind in the needle and the pigment, and the rinse water, those were problems that the industry spent most of the 20th century being forced to confront. Most people today have no idea what early tattoo equipment actually looked like. Not because it was hidden, because nobody thought it was worth preserving. The tools that shaped an entire subculture were thrown away when something less dangerous came along. Let us get into it. Number 10. Sharpened sewing needles bound with thread. Before the electric tattoo machine became accessible to working artists in the early 1900s, the most common tattooing implement in American and European shops was a group of ordinary sewing needles, the same ones sold in any dry goods store, lashed together at the tip with thread or wire to hold them in a rough cluster. The artist dipped the cluster into a small cup of ink and tapped it into the skin repeatedly by hand, a process borrowed directly from Polynesian hand-tap traditions, but without any of the ritual refinement those traditions had developed over centuries. The needles were not surgical grade. They were not designed for skin contact. They were designed to sew fabric. The thread binding them together was cotton, which absorbed ink and could not be fully sterilized between clients. A set of needles used in the morning on one customer went into the afternoon on the next, with nothing more than a wipe on a cloth and a dip in the ink cup. The technique produced results, but the results were imprecise, the lines thick and irregular, and the infection risk was substantial enough that many early tattoo clients accepted skin reactions as a normal part of the healing process. They were not normal. They were preventable. The needles were not banned by any single law. They were replaced by manufactured steel tattoo needles that were consistent in gauge, could be sterilized in alcohol, and eventually became single-use disposables that eliminated the cross-contamination problem entirely. Number 9. Coal tar and India ink as tattoo pigment. The ink used in early 20th century tattoo shops was not formulated for the body. It was whatever produced a dark, visible result when inserted under the skin. Coal tar derivatives were common. India ink, designed for drawing on paper, was widely used. Some artists worked with a mixture of soot, water, and whatever binding agent they had available. These were not inert substances. Coal tar is a known carcinogen. India ink contains carbon black and various resins that the skin does not readily absorb or break down. Artists who worked with coal tar pigments for years developed occupational skin conditions from prolonged handling. Clients whose tattoos were applied with these inks sometimes experienced chronic inflammatory responses years after the work was done, as the body continued to react to substances it could not neutralize. The regulation of tattoo pigments in the United States remained almost non-existent throughout most of the 20th century. The shift away from industrial pigments came gradually, driven by individual artists who understood chemistry well enough to recognize that what they were putting into clients was not designed to be there. Number 8. The rotary coil machine with no grounding wire. The electric tattoo machine arrived in American shops in the 1890s, adapted from Thomas Edison's electric pen, a device designed to punch stencil holes through paper. The early machines were coil-driven, meaning an electromagnetic coil pulled a metal bar up and down to drive the needle. The machines worked. They were faster than hand tapping and produced more consistent lines. They were also built with the electrical safety standards of the 1890s, which were essentially non-existent. Early machines had no grounding wire. A fault in the coil, a frayed connection, or moisture from ink and water on the artist's hands could complete a circuit through the client's body. Burns at the needle entry point were documented. Artists who worked long hours with ungrounded machines reported hand numbness from low-level current passing through their grip across years of operation. Shops that ran multiple machines off a single outlet using improvised wiring arrangements produced environments where electrical safety was an afterthought. Grounding standards in professional electrical equipment were not applied to tattoo machines as a matter of formal regulation until decades after the machines themselves became standard. The ungrounded machine was not banned. It was corrected, one workshop and one regulation at a time. Number 7. The communal ink cup. In early tattoo shops, a single small cup of ink sat on the work surface beside the artist. Every needle that left the client's skin and needed to be recharged went back into that cup. Every client who sat in the chair during a given day contributed whatever was present on and under their skin to that shared supply. The cup was rarely changed between clients. It was not sterilized between clients. It was refilled from the same larger stock bottle when it ran low. The communal ink cup was not considered a contamination risk by the standards of the era because the germ theory of disease, though established by the late 19th century, had not yet fully penetrated the practices of industries outside formal medicine. Artists worked with the cup the way barbers worked with the shared strop and straight razor, as a tool of the trade that was good enough until it demonstrably was not. The single-use ink cap, a small plastic cup filled fresh for each client and discarded after the session, became the standard only after state-level health codes began specifically addressing tattoo shops in the second half of the 20th century. Before that, the communal cup was the universal practice. Number 6. Straight razor skin preparation. Before tattooing a section of skin, the artist needed to remove hair from the area. In early shops, the tool for this was a straight razor, the same type used in barbershops of the period. A single straight razor was used on every client who came through the door. It was stropped between uses, which sharpened it, but did not sterilize it. The razor opened the top layer of skin in microscopic cuts as it shaved, as all razors do. Those microscopic cuts were an entry point. Immediately after shaving, the needle went to work on the same skin. The sequence meant that a blood-borne pathogen present on the razor from a previous client had direct access to the next client's subcutaneous tissue through a needle that was about to enter it repeatedly. Disposable single-use razors for skin preparation became a regulatory requirement in most jurisdictions only after hepatitis B, and later HIV made the transmission pathways impossible to ignore publicly. Until then, the straight razor was considered standard professional practice. Number 5. Homemade petroleum jelly substitutes as wound lubricant. During the tattoo process, artists apply a lubricant to the skin to reduce friction from the needle and keep the surface workable. In early shops, commercial petroleum jelly was used when available. When it was not, artists substituted whatever they had: lard, vegetable shortening, mineral oil mixed with whatever was on the shelf. These substitutes were not formulated for open skin contact. They introduced their own contaminants, particularly the animal-based fats, which could carry pathogens, and which provided a growth medium for bacteria in the wound rather than a barrier against them. Some artists added carbolic acid to their lubricant mixtures as an antiseptic, which was better than nothing but was itself an irritant applied directly to skin that was simultaneously being punctured several thousand times per minute. The improvised lubricant was not banned so much as it was made irrelevant by the commercial availability of sterile, skin-safe lubricants formulated specifically for medical and cosmetic skin contact. Number 4. Bone and bamboo hand tap instruments. At the same time that electric machines were spreading through urban tattoo shops in American cities, a significant portion of tattooing in the United States was still being done using hand instruments in communities where the electric machine had not arrived or was not trusted. Sailors returning from the Pacific brought Polynesian-style hand tap instruments or rough approximations of them. Bamboo handles with needle clusters lashed to the tip, sometimes bone instruments carved from whatever was available. These instruments held ink in the fibers of the binding material as much as on the needle tips themselves. They could not be sterilized without destroying the binding. They were used across multiple sessions and multiple clients, wiped down between uses in ways that addressed visible contamination but not microbial contamination. The instruments produced work that, in skilled hands, was as precise as anything an early electric machine could produce. The sterilization problem was not a problem of skill. It was a problem of materials and knowledge that the artists using them did not yet have access to. Number 3. The vinegar and turpentine rinse. Early tattoo artists used a rinse solution on the skin during and after the tattoo process. The solutions varied by shop and by region, but vinegar and turpentine were both commonly used separately and occasionally in combination. Vinegar was weakly acidic and provided some antibacterial effect. Turpentine was a solvent derived from pine resin that reduced surface contamination and had some antiseptic properties. Turpentine also caused contact dermatitis in a significant proportion of clients, produced fumes that were harmful with prolonged inhalation in poorly ventilated spaces, and stripped the natural oils from the skin in ways that impaired healing. Artists who worked in small shops with no ventilation and used turpentine throughout the day reported respiratory symptoms that accumulated over years of practice. The rinse was not banned. It was replaced by isopropyl alcohol, and later by purpose-formulated skin antiseptics, as these became inexpensive and widely available. The artists who kept using turpentine did so largely out of habit and because it was what they had been taught. Number 2. The open flame needle sterilization method. Between clients, or when a needle visibly needed cleaning, some early tattoo artists passed their needles through the flame of an alcohol lamp or a candle. The logic was sound in principle. Heat kills microorganisms. The execution was inadequate in practice. Passing a needle through a flame for 2 to 3 seconds reached the surface temperature necessary to char organic material, but did not sustain the temperature long enough or evenly enough to achieve reliable sterilization of a needle. That had been inside a human body. Carbon deposits from the flame accumulated on needle tips and were carried into the next client's skin. The needles cooled and were used immediately before any material that had not been fully destroyed could be verified as neutralized. The flame method gave artists the visible reassurance of having done something between clients without providing the actual protection that something was supposed to deliver. The autoclave, a pressurized steam sterilization unit that achieved consistent and verifiable sterilization of metal instruments, became accessible to tattoo shops in the mid-20th century. Where it was adopted, the flame lamp went out. Where it was not, the lamp kept burning until regulation forced the issue. Number 1. The reused bandage and petroleum wrap finish. When the tattoo was complete, the artist covered the fresh wound with a bandage. In early shops, the bandage was cloth, often the same roll of cloth bandage used on every client in the shop that week. It was cut to size, pressed against the open skin, and taped in place with whatever adhesive tape was available. The cloth was not sterile. The tape was not sterile. The fresh tattoo, which was an open wound across whatever surface area the design covered, was sealed against a non-sterile material for the hours of initial healing when it was most vulnerable to contamination. Some artists wrapped the finished tattoo in waxed paper held with string. Some used strips torn from brown paper bags. The improvised wound closure was the last point in a process that began with improvised needles and improvised ink and improvised lubricant, and it finished the same way it started, with whatever was at hand applied by a man who had learned the trade from another man who had done the same thing. Modern tattoo aftercare involves single-use sterile bandaging, medical-grade adhesive film, and written aftercare instructions based on actual wound healing research. The distance between a cloth wrap from a communal roll and a sterile, breathable film applied once and discarded is not a long distance in time. It is less than a century. It feels like a different world. 10 tools, none of them evil, all of them invented by people who were doing the best they could with what the era offered. What replaced each of them was not genius. It was patience, incremental knowledge, and the willingness of a profession to look honestly at what it was actually doing to the people sitting in its chairs. That examination took longer than it should have. It always does.